Let's go back to talking about the relationship between the arms control process and the forces we had, and we'll begin to bring some triad issues up here. To kind of set the stage, of course, the United States began with a nuclear force capability that was basically bombers, and then we added a lot of tactical units to it, and then we got into the ICBM force, and shortly after it we got into the submarine-launched ballistic missiles Sea Force, and there was a very brief period of time when we had a long-range cruise missile, the Snark, that was deployed.
Yeah.
But at any rate, this ICBM bomber SLBM structure that we had, the strategic triad, kind of carried forward. And there always was a debate about how do you think about the triad? How do you hedge against the vulnerability of various legs? And the arms control component comes up, of course, and that debate that was going on about ICBM vulnerability and whether the Soviets, with their heavy ICBM forces and perhaps breakout capabilities and that kind of thing, were putting the Minuteman at risk in a way where they could destroy it in a disabling first strike.
Yeah.
And so,
well, our reasons for the triad haven't really basically changed.
Mm-hmm.
They've just become much more important today.
Mm-hmm.
So let me start back there.
Okay.
Certainly, each leg of the triad had a different strength.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only the synergism between them, but each of them on its own had a different distinct strength and a different distinct characteristic. In the case of the bombers, which is the easiest, is that it's not just that we had a lot of bombers, is that the bomber was always the visible way to demonstrate resolve. Mm-hmm. And it was totally controllable. And I can think of at least 3 or 4 instances when launching the bombers fully loaded with nuclear weapons in a very visible way so that our adversary of the moment saw it had an enormous effect, because it was a demonstration of will that was visible and it was totally controllable. Now, we often say, well, the bombers are recallable. Well, they're really not as recallable as ICBMs. If you measure recallable, the time frame between when you commit it and when it impacts, then the ICBMs are more recallable. In other words, I don't have to commit the ICBM until 30 minutes before impact. We have to commit the bombers
a long time ahead.
a long time before impact, so that's not the issue. The strength of the ICBM, of course, was that you always had this large force ready to go. And that had 2 particulars. It was very stabilizing in that there was no way to take that force out short of a massive attack on the continental U.S. So there couldn't be any ambiguity. So if you're going to attack my ICBM force, you have committed yourself to all-out nuclear war. So that was a great stabilizing strength. And then when we went from Peacekeeper, BERV, to mostly single warhead ICBMs, then they became a very unattractive target, because you have to go at least 2 for 1, and that's not a very attractive target. The SLBMs have always had the same strength, that is, technologically, so far they are virtually, and whatever is deployed is virtually invulnerable. On the other hand, the SLBM force, which gives you a secure second strike force, so no one can ever believe they can succeed with the first strike. It also happens to be the most expensive and the hardest to maintain. The bombers are really the least expensive because they have other purposes. So if you just say the bombers, if they were only nuclear, it'd be different, but they're not. And the ICBMs are very, very efficient. So I would reiterate, they each fill a bombers, flexibility, visible demonstration of will, ICBMs, insurance against piecemeal attack, and the SLBMs assured survivable second strike. If you didn't have those, then if you didn't have the ICBMs, then you could think, well, today we've got our bombers on 3 bases. They're not on alert. So if you didn't have to worry about the ICBMs and the SLs, you could take the bombers out with 3 weapons. Absolutely, they're gone. Can't get them back. You could mount an attrition campaign against the SLBMs. You know that. How successful an attrition campaign be, I don't know, but it could be more successful over time. But you don't dare do that because you've got now 400 ICBMs. So even though those different characteristics and the interplay between the characteristics were important even when we had a lot of ICBMs and we had a third of the bombers on alert, they're even more important today because we don't have that large force. But so when you think about which leg of the triad would I give up, the favorite target is the ICBMs, which is curious, because that's the last leg I would give up. But and interesting enough, the administration that would like to see 0, but they know it's not possible, have strongly supported the triad. It was the logic of the triad. At one time, as you know, we tried to make the ICBMs survivable with mobile systems.
I was going to talk about that for a moment.
Came up.
Yeah. Of course, when we developed the ICBM force, initially it was liquid-fueled systems, and you didn't really have them in hardened silos, and so you know they were a relatively soft target. And then we developed the solid-fueled Minutemen systems, and we put them in silos. We hardened the silos. Interestingly enough, we found out from the Soviets later on, the interviews that were conducted in the Soviet Union after the fall, talking to them over there, that one of the reasons they thought that we were preparing a first strike with our ICBMs is we didn't harden the silos enough. They said, well, you know, we would have super hardened the silos if we thought we were going to ride out a first. So obviously the American strategy was we're not going to be there. But at any rate, we put them in hardened silos, and one of the things that we did through the series of arms control agreements is we put limits on the number of silos and the kinds of silos that you could build. But as you said, we got into this period of time where we were looking at all kinds of different basing schemes for the ICBMs. Do you think we'll ever get back to looking at different basing schemes again? I mean, I've heard some speculation on that.
Well, you know, the GBSD, ground-based strategic deterrent, the concept still, they held the concept open to possibilities. The problem with mobile deployments, which are fairly easy to do in Russia, are just very hard to do in the U.S. That our concept for the small ICBM, which, to be very frank, I thought was absolutely unworkable, but the concept was that we're going to put a missile in a vehicle, and it's going to go out somewhere in the countryside and hunker down and wait for the launch direction. If you just calculate the kind of security forces that would have to make that workable, it just becomes absolutely undoable. When it came to the peacekeeper deployment, we went through 10 different concepts, and finally Senator Warner, the Senate Armed Services leader, he called me over to his house in Georgetown when I was chief, and and said, Larry, you've got to give me a story I can tell on how to do this. And so I went through 3 approaches. And by the time I got through, he said, give it up. No one's going to listen that long. It's too complex. You're never going to sell this. So I went back and a week later told the SecDef, Mr. Secretary, we just need to deploy these in Minuteman silos. The logic, though, was to play on the Soviet fear. Soviet fear was that they were first strike. And what we wanted them to believe is that while we weren't going to do a preemptive strike, that we could launch them before they did any damage. So my argument
Before they did damage to us.
to our ICBMs.
Yes.
So my argument with the SecDef at the time was, Mr. Secretary, for the real purposes, we could deploy them on the J.C. Penney parking lot because the Soviets can't count on us not launching under attack. Said, so the reason we want to put them in hardened silos is because it will provide some survivability. And secondly, it's a lot safer place to keep them. I do not want them on the J.C. Penney parking lot. I want them someplace where they are secure. But so the hardened silo really was a Minuteman heritage. It was the cheapest, easiest way to do it. I have to tell you that I was not fond of a 10-warhead missile. President's program, we did our very best to field it, and we did it. You may remember we were agitating for 500 small ICBMs and 50 more peacekeepers. Air Force never wanted 500 small ICBMs or 50 peacekeepers, or the second 50. First 50, not the second 50. But we were humble enough, it may seem a strange word for a group of 4-stars, but we were humble enough to understand that the president may have some different objectives that we don't understand. Well, now we know what they were. At the time, we didn't. They were just the president's program. Never occurred to us that he was taking down the Soviet Union with a different weapon.